You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. A lot of people seem to think that sexual desire is something that's supposed to be spontaneous, automatic, and easy. In other words, if you're attracted to someone, arousal and desire should just naturally happen. And when it doesn't, many people assume that something is wrong, perhaps that their libido is gone, or that maybe they've lost the spark in their relationship. The truth, however, is that desire is far more complex than that. Sexual arousal and desire are deeply shaped by things like stress, emotional safety, distraction, and the way our own unique brains and bodies respond to intimacy. In today's show, we're going to explore the neuroscience of sexual arousal and the many different pathways through which desire can emerge. We'll discuss why stress, burnout, trauma, painful sex, and major life transitions can dramatically alter our relationship with pleasure. We'll also discuss why understanding sex on the brain may be one of the keys to reconnecting with desire. My guest is Kana Cassard, a sex therapist, painful sex specialist, certified trauma therapist, and author of the new book, Arousal Answered, An Expert's Guide to Authentic Pleasure and Liberating Sex. Her mission is to help others liberate themselves from outdated sexual scripts and empower them to rewrite their authentic sexual narratives. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. Do you ever find yourself dreaming about a career where you get to talk about sex and psychology all day long? What if I told you there's a place that can connect you with world-class experts and has a large, thriving community? Sexual Health Alliance does just that. Sexual Health Alliance helps you to build the career of your dreams and is at the forefront of sexuality education. Students come from all parts of the world and from all types of backgrounds. Whether you're in school just starting out on your journey or building advanced skills in your profession, Sexual Health Alliance's comprehensive certifications, engaging events, and self-paced online education will move you beyond the basics and set you up to become sexceptional. Visit sexualhealthalliance.com and start building the sexuality career of your dreams today. And let them know that you heard about Sexual Health Alliance on this podcast. Hi, Kana, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
It's wonderful to have you here. So you've just published a new book called Arousal Answered. To get us started, can you tell us the brief story behind this book? So why did you write it in the first place? And what are you hoping that it will do for readers?
My story, essentially, in writing the book started when I experienced my own pelvic pain and pain during intercourse. And then I started to specialize in helping other people do that because I was becoming a sex therapist at the time, going through my degree. And I started to notice the same experiences were happening again and again, that once symptoms were kind of managed, the question was like, now what? What do I do with my arousal? I don't really like sex the way that sex has been wired in my system because it's been detected sort of as a threat. And so from all these very informal clinical interviews with clients, essentially, I started to see these 5 different pathways emerge, which created the arousal architecture. And realizing that people needed to have a better framework to understand how to approach their arousal from a place that created safety first, and understanding that sexual interest might not look the same as somebody who maybe hasn't had pain during intercourse. And then over the course of 20 years, I started to see the same thing showed up for clients who had arousal issues or desire discrepancies or erectile variability. And I realized that it wasn't just sex with pain and folks who were experiencing those kinds of pelvic pain conditions, that it was emotional pain with sex. So I started to integrate that understanding from the neuroscience perspective of how we associate pain or threat or even trauma, and sought out somatic therapy training as well, and started to integrate that in, and noticed a massive change and shift with my clients when I started to bring the conversation of the body into the challenges they were having around sex. So it wasn't just about try these new intimacy exercises. It was let's teach you what's happening with your body so that you can feel more prepared going into sex and actually be excited about it when it's been paired with threat. And I realized that not everybody has access to be able to work with a sex therapist. And so I wanted to make this as accessible as possible. And so essentially the book is pretty much what I walk most of my clients through. So it's almost like a step-by-step guide of having this expert in your pocket, teaching you the nervous system regulation components, the sexual science, and then how to put it all together with the framework of the arousal architecture so that it can be a lot more accessible to people who might not be interested in going to sex therapy or who can't access it in that moment. So this is my just attempt to get the word out about how to have more authentic sex and more liberating, pleasurable experiences.
Thanks for sharing that. And I love everything that you said there. And I think it is really important to recognize, in the US, we have a few thousand certified sex therapists for a country of more than 300 million people, right? So sex therapy, as you said, isn't always accessible to everyone and also not necessarily affordable or covered by insurance. And so I think it's great to have more tools that are out there that are available for people that can really give them that kind of self-understanding that they need. So you talk a lot about neuroscience in the book, which might not strike folks as being the sexiest topic, but understanding sex on the brain is actually really crucial. And it just might be the key to understanding how we can all unlock more sexual pleasure. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about precisely why learning more about neuroscience can be transformative for people's sex lives.
Yeah. And you're right. Oftentimes when I start to lean into this conversation with clients, I see their eyes glaze over a little bit. They're like, oh no, science, reminds me of that 8 a.m. class in 12th grade. But it can be really sexy because it can help open up doors and pathways to many more potential possibilities for them. The way that I really like to initially frame it is by understanding that most everything that we do and most everything we believe about sex is typically a learned response. So something happened where we got a message around sex. We learned about sex in some component or some capacity. And that started to teach our body to expect certain things around sex. And so that became a learned behavior. So the beliefs that we inherit from our culture, from sex education, from our peers, all of those beliefs start to create scripts about how we expect sex to happen. And so this is a brain process of stimuli and then outcome response experience. And that then starts to translate if we have an unpleasant stimulation around that. So if there's shame, guilt, uncertainty associated with the topics around sex or the experience of sex, then our brain starts to learn that this is an unsafe thing to engage in. And so the brain will start to tell the body to brace against this as if it were another kind of threat response, like a tiger jumping through the room. That might not be the intensity that somebody experiences, although it often is when somebody has had a lot of sexual shame. So teaching them that there is this actual neurobiological response that's happening and that it's not just about them being broken or that they just have low arousal and that's just who they are, although some people are, but oftentimes helping people understand that neurobiological component reduces the shame so much and they feel like they actually have control over something that has felt really out of their control. And so just teaching them how to then shift the sexual script, how to repair, rewire, and help them have experiences that feel more pleasant-based, more positive, more resilient with their experiences. And that will start to rewire the brain's process with it.
Yeah. So understanding the science of sex can be really crucial to really understanding yourself and how your body responds in sexual situations. And to the extent that you have that kind of self-understanding, you can adjust and adapt sex in ways that work with you instead of against you. So let's talk about sexual arousal and desire. Now, most of my listeners are probably familiar with spontaneous versus responsive desire, right? Spontaneous desire is the kind that just hits you out of the blue like a ton of bricks and you just want to have sex. By contrast, responsive desire is usually thought of as being more context-based and where desire emerges in response to some type of stimulation, right? So it's sort of an arousal first form of desire where you kind of need to be turned on first before you can feel in the mood. Now, you argue that this spontaneous versus responsive distinction doesn't capture the full complexity of arousal. So how does your model expand the conversation? And what are some of the different pathways through which desire can emerge?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. because for some people, it doesn't really feel like they fit fully in either or. And that understanding that desire is fluid and it can be kind of on a spectrum, or at least like what I've seen. And it requires, as you were mentioning with responsive, for both, it can require context, awareness of stress levels, relationship dynamics, life circumstances. So to give an example of this, when I was working with one of my pelvic pain clients, but this also relates to a lot of the clients that I work with, after she had managed the majority of her symptoms, she wanted to explore what her new arousal response system was like. And instead of trying to identify, like, do I have more of a spontaneous desire or do I have more of a responsive desire? She started to like break this into context and understanding from a spectrum where she experienced more spontaneous desire or access to spontaneous desire when her pain is well managed, when communication with her partner was strong, when work stress was low and she felt connected to her partner, like all of those things. If her partner invited a sexual experience, she was like, yeah. She didn't need to have that sort of arousal first experience. She was ready to go. But then if she had maybe a week where she had recently experienced pain during intercourse, like had a flare, there had been stress or, miscommunications with her partnership, she needed a little bit more context, safety buildup before she could access her desire. And so having that more fluid understanding around desire is just like an added bonus to, or like an added expansion to the revolutionary framework of spontaneous and responsive. And so this is how people can start to understand that there's various pathways to arousal, to desire, to pleasure. And there can be the understanding that it can be the same person, but just different contexts and different access to desire, which is why ultimately the arousal architecture was built in helping clients find these different pathways. So instead of thinking, why is my libido broken? They can start to understand that maybe they just need to be asking themselves, what does my nervous system need today?
Yeah. And I think that makes total sense, that desire is something that can be fluid, and the way that you experience it might change from one situation to the next, one relationship to the next, right? Just because you might experience spontaneous desire doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be spontaneous. And sometimes you do need the right contextual cues for that desire to even set in. So, I think we're all somewhere on the spectrum of spontaneous to responsive. And if we have the right conditions or circumstances, desire might look more like one versus the other. And like we said, it can change and be fluid over time.
Yeah. And like everybody loves an avatar. Like people love being like, oh, I have responsive desire or I have spontaneous desire, because it's like we identify with it, we understand it communicates a language. But for folks, when they don't feel like they know how to easily identify with either of those, being able to create an expansive possibility of like, it's okay. You don't have to be only that. It can shift and it can change. And I think even that permission just turns on the light for different possibilities.
Yeah, totally agree. We need to talk about low libido. If you've ever looked for a supplement with the goal of giving yours a boost, you know what a minefield it can be. There are so many options, and some of them contain really questionable ingredients. It's a market that's notorious for products that are underdosed, ineffective, or in some cases, just downright shady. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Drive Boost from VP Health. VP Health has changed the game by focusing on what truly matters: trust and transparency. Imagine a libido supplement formulated by doctors, one that's rigorously third-party tested for purity and potency, so you know exactly what you're getting. And it's made right here in the USA. That's Drive Boost. This supplement is also unique because it's formulated for men and women alike. So if you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a libido supplement that you can feel confident about and that actually works, it's time to check out Drive Boost. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. So after difficult experiences, like if you're enduring a lot of chronic stress, burnout, painful sex, you're dealing with betrayal or trust issues in a relationship, there's trauma, parenting, life transitions, there's all kinds of things that can happen in life. And when those things happen, it's common for people to feel like their libido has completely disappeared. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how difficult life experiences can sort of reshape our arousal pathways over time.
So similar to how we were talking about with the flexibility around desire, our libido is something that is available sometimes and not available other times. And there are some people who always have access to libido and some people who feel like it's harder to access. But I think having an understanding that it can also be really flexible depending upon our emotional body resources around life circumstances or having been influenced by adverse experiences over time. These things can really shape it and can also help people have the compassion for themselves that it's not that they are stuck in one kind of experience with their libido and that they can actually have compassion for the place that they're at and know that with time, things will probably return with a little bit of awareness and attention and intention to the ways in which they're engaging with their libido and with their partner if they have one. A lot of times people, when they're kind of feeling in a slump or they've experienced something unpleasant or adverse or a trauma, they often try to throw more of the technical skills at their sexual situation. So they schedule more date nights or they try to do some new intimacy exercise that they heard online. And what often happens is that the nervous system still perceives sex as this threatening concept. Mm-hmm. And so those things don't work. And then it kind of reinforces this idea that sex is a threat and it's a thing that's just not going to work and it's not for me. And so people feel even more shame. They feel more defeated. But creating awareness around nervous system sensations and experience, and then building nervous system regulation tools and techniques can help retrain and rewire the body so that it doesn't continue to reinforce that pathway of sex equals threat, but it can potentially start to help them focus on what is a neutral experience around sex or around sexual interest or arousal or even intimacy, hand-holding. Starting to understand and experience the felt sense of neutrality helps people feel a lot more in control and more confident that their libido can come back if they're not expecting it to be pleasurable or exciting from the get-go after they've had stress or trauma. I've found that with a lot of my clients, they feel like there's so much more permission given when they can just focus on neutral first rather than trying to have a sexual experience and wondering why they're not accessing arousal the way they want to, why they're not having the orgasm that they want. And instead, when we can remove that pressure of just like, can you just find neutral? Can that be the win for a sexual experience? And I see people's bodies like drop in a good way, like their shoulders drop. They're like, whew, thank goodness. You mean I don't have to enjoy sex? Like that's allowed? Like, yes, that's the starting point of healing the relationship with libido when it's been in a place somebody hasn't wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really the first step in creating the neutrality and creating the space and the permission that it'll be okay. The pleasure will come when the nervous system has felt like it can be safe with and around sexual experiences.
Yeah, and I think you're so right that oftentimes when we encounter difficult life circumstances, that libido and sex often are one of the first things to disappear. And when that happens, oftentimes people will say, I don't have desire for sex, but I feel like it's something I should be doing. And so they kind of force it, right? Like you said, they might plan more date nights or schedule some intimacy. And they're doing it because it's something they think they're supposed to be doing, not because they really truly want it. And when you're doing it because you think you're supposed to be doing it, that doesn't set the circumstances or conditions for it to be a really truly pleasurable experience. And so I think you're right that it is so important to step back and really try and understand yourself, your body, how sex works and operates in your brain so that you can be approaching sex from a place where you're actually open to the possibility of pleasure.
Yeah. And also sometimes a relationship or maintenance sex, I like to call it. It's like, I think that sometimes that can be a helpful part of being in a relationship with somebody. And so even having that consensual opt-in for recognizing, I'm not really in the mood, but like, I know my partner really wants it. And so like, if it truly is a body consent, like I want to do this for the health of our relationship, then I like to invite clients to explore what that can feel like, where they're opting into the experience of like more willing toward wanting. So that, the idea of the wheel of consent is like enduring, willing, wanting. How can somebody step into, instead of being enduring of like, oh, I have to have sex because it's been so long, where that can reinforce the concepts of sex equals something unpleasant or dangerous. Stepping more into, I am choosing to do this because this is relationship maintenance and that is important to me. And on an emotional, relational component, I really want that. Even if my body is not physiologically interested or that's not really what I'd be doing, I'd rather like watch, my show that I'm really interested in. That can create a way for people to take control back when they felt like there's only one option. Either I'm into sex or I'm having to tolerate it. And obviously, like the latter is not great to do.
Yeah. Sex shouldn't just be something that you tolerate. No.
No.
So you talk a lot about somatics in your book. And for people who aren't really familiar with that term or what it really means, can you tell us what does it mean to approach sex somatically? And how can taking a more somatic perspective open the door to more arousal and desire?
Somatic is this buzzword, or it's, become such a buzzword. And really, it's just physiological cues, like cues that are felt inside the body. So if we're creating the basic foundational understanding of it, it's looking at what are the physiological cues happening in the body and starting to become familiar with them helps people shift their experience with their body and with experiences in their life or stimulation. So incorporating somatics into sex therapy or into their process of having healthier sexual experiences is about noticing what sensations are happening in the body in any given moment. So whether that's in a time when they're feeling really excited or whether they're feeling uncertain or anxious or when they're just feeling neutral. So I like to think of sensations without judgment. They're more on a spectrum of pleasant to unpleasant, and in the middle is neutral. Those are different experiences than numb, where numb is disconnected, where a person doesn't feel any kind of sensations in a part of their body or their entire body. And that's usually comes from having trauma experiences and dissociating. So on the spectrum of pleasant to unpleasant, what is pleasant for me might feel unpleasant to somebody else. And so that's where it can also be really important about creating an authentic experience of being in our own body and knowing that whatever sensation we're experiencing has no judgment, isn't right or wrong. It's just a preferred or an unpreferred sensation or a neutral sensation. So in this process of integrating somatics in, it's starting to create the awareness of what am I experiencing? Is this something that I want to be experiencing? And might there be something else in my body occurring that I would prefer to focus my attention on? And in doing that process over time with like lots of experiences of doing that, it starts to create and build that mind-body connection, which is so important for sexual wellness and just overall resilience. So that's the foundational basics of it. And then when it comes to sex therapy and using it as a healing process or trauma reprocessing experience, then it starts to bring in some more skills. But for folks who are reading the book or just wanting to start their practice of integrating more somatic awareness, simply noticing sensations from pleasant to unpleasant and where neutral sits and how they experience neutral.
Yeah. So one way you can sort of start down this path is by engaging in mindfulness practices, right? Which is something we've discussed on the show a few times before. And it's something that is more challenging than it might sound to some people, because many of us, myself included, we tend to kind of like live in our heads, right? And we're very consumed by whatever thoughts are happening there. And so we're not really paying attention to the sensations and everything that's going on in our body. And so we're not necessarily always totally connected, including when we show up for an intimate experience. And so it is something that really takes a lot of practice. And it's not like a switch that you're going to turn on overnight, right? This is something that's a skill that you're going to need to build up over a period of weeks or months, maybe even years, right?
Yeah. It's an ongoing life practice, I think. Like I'll have moments where I've been a little bit less connected to my body and I'll need to remind myself constantly, okay, pay attention to the sensation of the sheets under my body. Notice the clothes that are moving on my body. Notice my partner's smell or experience the touch. And it can be also outside of sexual experiences too, like just noticing the sensations of washing your hands. Because most of the time, like you said, we're often in our heads thinking about the next thing to do, that thing that somebody said that annoyed us. And with like mindfulness to that moment of noticing the sensations of hand washing, it can help tell the body, all right, this is a time for us to not be in anxiety about the future. We can just be present and engaged in this moment, and there's no threat around us. Everything right now in this little present moment is okay. And so that really helps. I think it's a thing that we should be doing more often, and I use should very lightly. But as people who are trying to continuously find ways to have less stress in our bodies, simple mindfulness or somatic exercises, like just noticing what we're doing in any given moment when it feels generally neutral or pleasant, can really help with that lifelong process of building more personal awareness and mind-body connection.
Yeah. And so much of this can start outside of the bedroom, right? So it's not something where you can just, I think, only practice mindfulness when you're in bed or during moments of intimacy. There are all kinds of things you can do in everyday life where you can kind of strengthen that mind-body connection. And, for example, many therapists that I've spoken to suggest engaging in a practice called mindful eating, right? So while you're sitting there eating your food, you're paying attention to all of the different sensory inputs. So not just how does your food look, but how does it smell? How does it taste? How does it sound while you're chewing it, right? And so all of these things are different sources of sensory input that can help you to be more present and in the moment and in tune with sensory information in the body. And so that's just one simple thing that you can do in everyday life that is a skill that helps to build up over time.
Yeah. And this is actually the reason why the first portion of my book, I actually don't talk a lot about sexual content, because I help my clients do the exact same thing where they start to learn and build that foundational awareness in low pressure situations where they're sitting in the living room. There's not a lot of pressure to do anything in that moment. It can be so much easier to build that muscle memory first, because then when you go into a more what feels like a high pressured situation, like a sexual experience where the stakes feel a little bit higher because maybe you've had fights with a partner and you really want this to go well. And so suddenly, if you've only practiced in the bedroom with mindfulness exercises, then you're having to do that, learn the new skill, and try to be present for a sexual experience. And that's just too much. And so having the learned and felt experience outside of the bedroom in a low pressure situation helps set people up for that muscle memory to really show up so that their brain says, hey, I know how to do this. We can focus on the sensation of the sheets. And then that makes it a lot easier for them to access those nervous system regulation tools. It's so important.
Yeah. And it's something you can also incorporate into solo self-pleasure as well, right? So where you're just learning to be present and in the moment and connected with your senses when you're engaging in masturbation. And that's sort of the intermediate step between where you go from doing this in everyday life to doing it with a partner in bed. You can kind of practice on your own during masturbation. And again, paying attention to all of that sensory information and learning to be very present and in the moment. So if listeners take one big idea away from this conversation about sexual arousal and desire, what do you want people to understand about how arousal and desire actually work?
Having an understanding that it's not about I'm broken if my sexual arousal is looking a certain way, but instead looking at it from a more systemic approach and perspective of what does my nervous system need today to help set me up for the potential for access to arousal. So kind of starting even sooner and looking at it from that more resilient place and the more systemic place is going to be hopefully life-changing for a lot of people.
Well, thanks for sharing all of that. I really appreciate you helping us to break down the science of what's happening in our brains and bodies during sexual desire and arousal. I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation in the next episode, where we're going to dive all into your arousal architecture and help people better understand what they can do to cultivate and create more satisfying sexual experiences.
Looking forward to it too.
Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and get a copy of your new book?
Absolutely. It's been such a great conversation. I am on Instagram, Kana_Cassard, and my book can be found at arousalansweredbook.com, where you can figure out how to buy it from major online retailers or independent bookstores.
Great. And I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.